It's late. You told yourself you wouldn't check your phone again, but you do anyway. No new message. You try to act like it doesn't matter, but something shifts inside you. Not panic, not heartbreak. Just a subtle tightening in your chest and a quiet question in your mind, why haven't they responded? And the confusing part is this: when they finally do reply, even if it's short or emotionally flat, you feel relief. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from distance. That reaction isn't random. And it's not weakness. If you're a super empath, you've probably noticed a pattern in your life. You connect deeply. You read people well. You sense emotional shifts before they're spoken. But somehow, you often find yourself drawn to the one person who feels slightly out of reach. The one who shows interest, then pulls back. The one who feels intense at first, then unpredictable. You don't chase chaos consciously. In fact, you value emotional depth and stability. So why does this dynamic keep repeating? Here's where it gets uncomfortable. What you interpret as chemistry may actually be activation. What feels like depth may be unpredictability triggering your nervous system. And unpredictability, psychologically, can feel intoxicating. Avoidant personalities tend to operate in patterns of closeness, followed by distance. They don't always do this intentionally. Often it's unconscious, but the effect is powerful. When someone alternates between warmth and withdrawal, your system goes on alert. You start paying closer attention. You become more emotionally attuned. Your empathy activates harder. And here's the paradox: the stronger your empathy, the more magnetic you become to someone who is emotionally avoidant. Not because you're weak, but because you are responsive, adaptive, understanding. You don't explode, you don't demand, you regulate yourself and give space. And to someone who fears emotional pressure, that feels safe. So the cycle begins quietly. You lean in to understand. They lean back to regulate. You soften. They stabilize at a distance. And somewhere in that rhythm, you mistake anxiety for connection. This video isn't about blaming avoidance. And it's not about shaming empathy. It's about decoding a pattern that feels deeply personal, but is actually psychological. Because once you understand the mechanism, the dynamic stops feeling mystical and starts becoming manageable. If you've ever felt a powerful connection with someone who stayed just slightly out of reach, this isn't coincidence. There's a system at play. And we're about to break it down. If you've ever wondered why this dynamic feels so addictive, the answer isn't just emotional. It's biological. Your brain is responding to uncertainty the same way it responds to gambling, social media, and unpredictable rewards. When someone gives you consistent attention, your nervous system relaxes. But when their attention becomes inconsistent, something very different happens. The reward becomes anticipation. Think about how this shows up in modern dating. You match with someone. The first few conversations are effortless. They ask questions, they share, they seem genuinely interested. Then suddenly, the rhythm changes. Replies come hours later, sometimes days. When they do respond, the message is warm again. Your brain registers that warmth as relief. And that relief is powerful, because it arrives after tension. This pattern activates dopamine loops. Not because the connection is deep, but because it is unpredictable. The uncertainty itself becomes stimulating. You begin checking your phone more often. You start noticing subtle shifts in tone. A shorter reply feels significant. A delayed response feels threatening. Your attention narrows. You become more emotionally invested, even though the interaction is objectively becoming weaker. Here's what most people misunderstand. Avoidant individuals do not feel less. In many cases, they feel more. But instead of moving toward connection when emotion rises, they regulate by creating distance. Space helps them feel safe, so when emotional intensity increases, they withdraw. And when pressure decreases, they return. This rhythm isn't random, it is regulation. Now here is the uncomfortable part. If you grew up feeling that love had to be earned, your system may interpret distance as a challenge rather than a warning. You may feel driven to prove consistency, patience, and understanding. Chaos starts to feel familiar. Stability, strangely, may even feel boring or suspicious. So the connection becomes a nervous system dance. One person seeks safety through closeness. The other seeks safety through distance. Both are regulating, but in opposite directions. And because this pattern feels emotionally intense, it gets labeled as chemistry. At this point, most people make a critical mistake. They believe that more empathy will fix the connection. They communicate more clearly. They try to be more patient. They become even more understanding. But instead of stabilizing the dynamic, this often deepens it. The more predictable and emotionally available you become, the safer it feels for the other person to keep distance. Here's a simple micro-action to start breaking this loop. The next time someone becomes inconsistent, don't immediately adapt. Don't feel the silence. Pause. Notice what your body does first. Notice the urge to fix, clarify, or reconnect. That moment of awareness is the beginning of control. Because until you understand this biological pattern, your greatest strength, your empathy, can quietly become your greatest blind spot. Now here's where this becomes even more dangerous. At a certain point, empathy stops being connection and starts becoming strategy. You are no longer simply understanding the other person. You are trying to manage the relationship by predicting emotional outcomes. You might notice this in small ways. You begin choosing your words more carefully, not to express yourself, but to prevent withdrawal. You replay conversations in your mind, searching for the exact moment something shifted. You become highly attuned to mood, tone, timing. You adjust your behavior to maintain closeness. At first, this feels like maturity. It feels like emotional intelligence. But slowly, your inner world becomes organized around their emotional weather. This is the moment where many super empaths lose clarity, because the effort feels noble. Your nervous system registers every ounce of patience as loyalty, even when it is not being reciprocated. The more you invest, the harder it becomes to step back. And the deeper the attachment grows, the more you fear losing the connection you worked so hard to stabilize. But here's the dangerous part no one talks about. The more self-aware and emotionally regulated you become, the more attractive you can become to avoidant personalities. Why? Because you become safe to distance from. You do not explode. You do not create chaos. You absorb tension. This allows the cycle to continue without confrontation. So the loop intensifies. The more you lean in, the more they lean back. The more you regulate, the more distance becomes sustainable. Both people feel trapped, but neither fully understands why. And because the connection feels emotionally deep, leaving feels like abandoning something meaningful rather than stepping out of a pattern. You can see this clearly in situations like long texting gaps, canceled plans, or emotional conversations that end with, "I just need space." Instead of stepping back, you become more patient. You tell yourself they are stressed. You give them time. You try to become the safest person in their world. But safety for them often means distance from intensity. Here is another pattern break you can practice immediately. The next time you feel the urge to prove your consistency, pause and ask a different question. Is this effort creating mutual connection or maintaining imbalance? This single shift moves you from reaction to observation. Because once you begin observing the system instead of managing it, the dynamic changes. And that is where real power starts. By now, you understand the pattern. But here's where it stops being interesting psychology and starts becoming dangerous. Because this dynamic doesn't just affect the relationship, it starts reshaping you. At first it's small. You check their last seen status. You reread messages looking for hidden meaning. You notice when their tone changes from enthusiastic to neutral. You tell yourself you're just observant, intuitive, emotionally aware. But slowly, something shifts. Your emotional stability begins to depend on their responsiveness. If they engage, you feel calm. If they pull back, your focus narrows. You think about what changed. You analyze what you said. You consider sending a lighter message, or a deeper one, or maybe nothing at all. And here's the confronting truth. You're not addicted to them. You're addicted to relief. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from silence. Relief from the dopamine drop that happens when attention disappears. That late-night text doesn't feel good because it's meaningful. It feels good because the tension finally stopped. This is why ghosting feels devastating even when the relationship was shallow. It's not the person, it's the unresolved activation. Your system was mid-loop, and it never got closure. And here's where the stakes rise. When you continuously absorb inconsistency without consequence, you don't just train them that distance is acceptable. You train yourself that instability is normal. Listen to that again. You normalize mixed signals. You rationalize canceled plans. You tolerate emotional ambiguity. Not because you lack standards, but because your empathy keeps finding explanations. You think you're being patient. They experience it as permission. That's the friction point. If this pattern continues long enough, something more subtle happens. You stop asking, "Does this meet my needs?" and start asking, "How do I maintain this connection?" That shift is quiet. But it's everything, because now your identity is slowly reorganizing around unpredictability. Your clarity blurs. Your baseline for emotional safety lowers. What once felt confusing starts to feel familiar. And familiar feels safe, even when it isn't. If you don't interrupt this pattern, you don't just lose them. You slowly lose clarity about yourself. And that is the real cost of the empath-avoidant dynamic. Now that you see the pattern, the next step is not control, it's regulation. Because power in this dynamic does not come from changing the other person, it comes from stabilizing yourself. Most people misunderstand this. They believe leverage means becoming colder, distant, or playing games. But that only keeps you trapped in the same system. The avoidant already knows how to operate in distance. You don't win by copying their behavior. You win by stepping out of the emotional rhythm entirely. This is where nervous system regulation becomes your advantage. The next time inconsistency appears, notice the first impulse, the urge to explain, to send another message, to smooth tension. Instead of acting, pause. Feel what your body is doing. The tightening in your chest, the shallow breath, the restless energy in your hands. You are not responding to the present moment. You are responding to activation. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. The person who reacts first usually gives away the most power. So you interrupt the pattern. When they delay replying, you don't immediately compensate. When they pull back, you don't lean forward. When uncertainty appears, you return your attention to your own life. This is not punishment. This is recalibration. For example, imagine you're using a dating app. You send a thoughtful message. Hours pass. Then a full day. The old pattern would push you to check your phone repeatedly, maybe send a follow-up, maybe assume you said something wrong. Instead, you set the phone aside. You continue your evening. You meet friends. You work. You invest in your own stability. You sit with your phone face down on the table, telling yourself you don't care. But every vibration pulls your attention back. This time, you let the tension pass without acting. And slowly, the urgency fades. Something subtle begins to change. Your nervous system learns that uncertainty is not danger. Silence is not rejection. Delay is not a threat to your worth. This is where leverage quietly forms, because when you are no longer reacting automatically, the dynamic shifts. The avoidant senses the difference. The pressure they once felt disappears. And paradoxically, this often increases their curiosity. But the real transformation is not external. It's internal. You stop chasing clarity from others. you start creating clarity within yourself. Empathy remains, but now it has boundaries. Awareness remains, but now it has direction. In the next module, we take this further. We move from regulation to attraction. Because when your energy becomes stable, something unexpected happens. The same traits that once trapped you begin to draw healthier connections instead. At this stage, the goal is no longer to understand the avoidant or to change the pattern. The goal is to change your own response in real time. Because the truth is, the cycle only keeps repeating when your nervous system reacts automatically. When they pull away, your mind starts searching for meaning. When they go silent, your body interprets it as danger, and before you even realize it, you are back in the same loop, overthinking, analyzing, trying to regain control. Breaking the cycle means interrupting this reaction at the moment it starts. The next time they take space, notice what happens inside you before you do anything externally. Your heart may start racing. You may feel the urge to check your phone, reread old messages, or imagine worst-case scenarios. This is not love. This is your nervous system trying to restore familiarity. The key shift is learning to sit with that discomfort instead of acting on it. Because every time you do not react, you teach your brain that you are safe even without their reassurance. This is where emotional self-regulation becomes your power. Instead of focusing on their behavior, you redirect your attention to yourself. You ask, what do I need right now? Maybe it is grounding, distraction, connection with friends, or simply rest. You begin to meet your own emotional needs instead of outsourcing them to someone who cannot consistently meet them. Over time, this rewires the attraction itself. You stop being drawn to emotional unpredictability because it no longer feels familiar or exciting, it just feels draining. Another important shift is clarity. Empaths often stay in confusing situations because they are waiting for certainty from the other person. But certainty rarely comes from avoidance. It comes from your own boundaries. When someone repeatedly withdraws, sends mixed signals, or creates instability, you stop interpreting it as a puzzle to solve. You start seeing it as information. And information leads to decisions. This is where empathy becomes grounded, not self-sacrificing. Eventually, something surprising happens. You no longer feel the same pull toward emotionally unavailable people. You notice the red flags early. You recognize the patterns faster. And instead of feeling anxious when someone is consistent and emotionally present, you begin to feel safe. This is the moment the cycle truly breaks, because you are no longer trying to earn love. You are choosing it. And once you reach this point, your empathy stops being a weakness. It becomes a filter. It allows you to connect deeply, but only with people who are capable of meeting you at that same level. That is the difference between being trapped in the cycle and stepping completely out of it.